Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 12th of September. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates. To tell the truth, I must say that this day was the strangest day in this special operation since the beginning of this operation. Because this night was the first time when the Russians attacked the energy facilities in Ukraine. And as a result of that attack, the entire east part of Ukraine was shut down from electricity. And as a result of that, the entire infrastructure has been collapsed for a few hours. Mainly, the infrastructure in Kharkiv region was collapsed, in Donetsk region was collapsed, in Zaporozhye, Dnipropetrovsk were collapsed, near Kryvyi Rog was collapsed. And as a result of that, of course, the Ukrainians and the Western sources are saying that those attacks was just as an act of revenge of the Russians because of heavy retreat from the Kharkiv region. I have totally different opinion about that, and I'll explain to you why. My opinion that was some kind of demonstration, but not the demonstration to the Ukrainians or to the Kiev or to Zelensky. Nothing like that. That was some kind of demonstration to Putin, I suppose. Because starting this morning, I received at least 5 confirmation from 5 different sources that the Russians these days, today, have some negotiation in the military authorities and their head of Russia. And these five resources told us that the Russians are planning to change the state of special military operation. Tell the truth, I don't know what does it mean. But the thing is that they're planning to change the state and maybe the title of this operation. Maybe they're planning to call this operation just military operation, or maybe they're planning to call this operation counter-terrorist operation. I don't know. But the thing is that the Russians, they need to change something in this operation if they don't want, let's say, do some mobilization and to move more forces on their territory under their control. And of course, the Russians understand that to break the situation in their favor, they need to start destroying the infrastructural facilities, energy facilities, water facilities. They need to destroy everything and to shut down the Ukraine. Because as we understand, the main benefits that Ukrainians have in this operation is their railroads. They're very mobile, they're very flexible. They're able during a day to regroup and to move their forces from one side of Ukraine, let's say from Zaporozhye region, in direction to Kharkiv area, and the next day they're able to move their forces from Kharkiv district to the south. So they're very mobile. And as I told in my previous video, as a result of previous attack, the entire Ukraine was shut down and all trains stopped and they couldn't move. And of course, the Ukrainians now are doing some regrouping and they're moving their forces from Kharkiv in direction of the south. So every single train on this area was stopped, and that was a very perfect target for the Russians. And today we got a lot of updates this morning about attack near Pavlograd, near this railroad station in the south of Ukraine. The Russians didn't give us any number about the loss from the Ukrainians. I suppose that they're going to do this tomorrow. But anyway, this is the solution. This is the solution how to pin down the Ukrainians and not to allow them to be so flexible and mobile. So that was some kind of demonstration to Putin. He asked, let's say, could you give me a solution how to solve the problem, how to break the situation? And they told me that we can't afford ourselves a big army because it's like just volunteers and professional army, and the Ukrainians have 1 million army, and it's impossible to fight with 250,000 against 1 million army. but we can pin down them, and we can slow down them, and we can force them to be like pinned to certain territory without any possibility to move from one side to another. But for these purposes, they need to destroy the electricity facilities in this territory. So that was some kind of demonstration, because after those attacks this morning, I got update about the changing of the status. Because according to the current status, the Russians announced that it's just special military operation. According to their own legal part of this status, they are not able to attack the civilian buildings, like those energy facilities, like civilian facilities and so on. But they did this yesterday. And when they did this last night, I read a lot of notes, a lot of articles from the Russian military experts, military Telegram channels. And the only thing that everybody repeated, that whether the Russians did this just once or they are planning to do this on the regular basis. And everybody from the Russian side was waiting for this morning and this day. And as you know, during this day, the Russians did another strike on Kharkiv, because somewhere in this morning, the Kharkiv managed to restore their electricity, and they restored the railroad service, railroad connection, and so on. And during this day, the Russians did another strike, and the Kharkiv was shut down one more time. So they're trying to understand the benefits, the results, and what kind of benefits they can achieve from these kind of attacks. So this is about the situation. Now let's talk about a little bit about this. Is the first strangest thing that I noticed today. Another thing that, as we discussed, the front line has been stabilized. The Ukrainians are moving forces to the south. The Russians reports that more and more armored vehicles, tanks are heading in direction of the south. More and more forces they can see. And they're saying that there's a very high risk that Ukrainians are going to start counteroffensive operation exactly in these areas we discussed, on the line between Vasilievka towards Donetsk. For many reasons, we can understand the Ukrainians. First of all, from the strategic perspective, they need to cut the supply road, they need to cut these two territories. It's the first reason. The second one is Mariupol. Of course, if they return Mariupol, it will be another defeat. And today I remembered about the third reason why the Ukrainians want to attack in this area, and to be more precise, Neogledar, and mainly because of this small village by the name of Yelenovka. This small town, this small area, this one, is the prison where the Azov soldiers are kept by the Russians. So of course, it would be like another great victory for the Ukrainians if they are able to do some breakthrough in this area, to penetrate the Russians, to reach this prison, and to evacuate their Azov battalion soldiers. It can be a very nice media victory for them. But of course, I don't think that Ukrainians are going to waste their soldiers just for these purposes. Of course, they need to take Volnovakha to cut supply roads and so on. If we are talking about the north area, today we got more and more updates that Ukrainians, without counting losses, armored vehicles, infantry and troops, are trying to cross Seversky Donets River from Slaviansk in direction of Liman, with one purpose: to establish their bridgehead in this area. And we can understand them why. I'll try to explain to you. We will come to this later to see this in the global scope. As you understand, the Russians decided to prepare their front line along the river Oskol. This one. This is the river Oskol. This one. And if we take a look at this river, we're gonna understand that it's impossible barrier for crossing for the Ukrainians. If we are take a look at this part of Oskol River, this one, you see that this river is very wide, so you cannot build pontoon bridges. In this area, you are just able to cross this river using the bridges. But I'm sure that the Russians control the bridges, so it's impossible to cross the area from Liman bridgehead, from the small town Svetogorsk towards the town Kupiansk. If we're talking about Kupiansk, the Russians managed to establish their fortification, the front line has been stabilized, and the Ukrainians also can cross this area. So we can say that starting from Kupiansk till the Liman bridgehead, there is no place where the Ukrainians can cross this area, without having so big losses as Neva. And if we talk about the north part, about north area from Kupiansk till the Russian border, there is no reason to cross this area. I'll tell you why, because if you take a look at this map, you're gonna see that there is no railroad in this area. So the Ukrainians just can't move their forces in this direction. They can't even move their forces in Kupiansk because the Kupiansk railroad station is located on the Russian territory. So the only place where the Ukrainians can bring their reinforcement, let's say to Starovorovka, this one. And after that place, they need to move their forces using the local roads in direction to the north, just with purpose to cross this river somewhere in the north. But believe me, it's like the waste of time because these convoys will be spotted, of course, immediately, and they will be destroyed by the Russians from their territory. So this river, if we take a look from this perspective, is impossible area to cross for the Ukrainians, for many reasons that we discussed right now. So this is the reason why the Ukrainians, and this is the first, and the second one, it's autumn. Soon we're going to receive the winter, and the level of this river is going to rise. And I'm sure that in the months, it won't be even to establish pontoon bridges in this area because of the level of the water and of course the temperature of the water. Because now you can do this because the water is still comfortable for the soldiers, but later it will be very cold and it will be very impossible. But the Ukrainians, they need to develop their offensive operation. They need to push the Russians from this area, so that's why they're trying to cross Seversky Donetsk while the level of this river is low. While the rain season hasn't started, they need to do this. And this morning, all these days, like 3 days of this offensive operation in direction of Liman, we receive a lot of updates from the Ukrainians. They managed to establish their pontoon bridge near Raigorodok and establish control over Stara Karavan Bursovka, but these towns are not enough to establish bridgehead. It's nothing. Anyway, these pontoon bridges is under fire, not even artillery fire, but the Russians are able to just regular mortar systems, this territory will be under fire control. So with very heavy losses, still Ukrainians are trying to push in this area. Also today we got update that the Ukrainians got control over Svetogorsk and also are trying to develop their offensive operation to the north, trying to establish the real bridgehead. And using this bridgehead, of course, the Ukrainians will be able to, by reducing their losses, will be able to move a lot of forces to the north in direction of Kupiansk and to take control over the north part of Lugansk People's Republic, over this area. So this is the reason why this area is vital for the Russians, because if they lose this bridgehead, they will lose everything until Starobelsk. So everything they will lose, in this case, everything, all their achievements that they managed to gain during the first or second phase of this special operation, and the Lugansk People's Republic will one more time lose all its territory. But for now, the clashes. It's like third day in a row. The Russians reports that they still control this area and they are not allowed the Ukrainians to develop their offensive operation. The only important update that we received today that the Ukrainians managed to attack, to accumulate very powerful fist and attack in direction of Bilogorovka. We didn't have any updates. We received some updates from the Russian side that there is a very heavy clashes near Bilogorovka, near Lysychansk, but we haven't received any updates from the Ukrainian side that they managed to establish some flag or something like this in this small village. Furthermore, the Ukrainians reported a few hours ago that they managed to cross this river, Seversky Donetsk, near Bilogorovka, and that now they're doing something here in this direction, trying to attack or accumulate forces and then to attack Kremenaya or to attack the Russians in Liman from the back in Yampol. No more updates, so let's see. But I suppose that the Russians should move everything they have, but not to allow the Ukrainians to establish bridgehead on this side of Seversky Donetsk River, because, as I told you in a month, the level of this water is going to rise, and it will be impossible to, at least even with the number of Ukrainians they have right now, to cross this area. So they need to solve this issue today, this day, these weeks, like in the upcoming months. Why is that? Why is this so important for the Ukrainians to take control over this part of Severodonetsk River and about this north part? I tried to explain to you. I did my own analysis of this situation, tried to understand and figure out what the Russians are planning to do. Why did they decide to regroup from this area? Why we receive more and more updates that they're planning to change the status of the special operation and start to attack the civilian facilities, like energy facilities, water facilities, and so on, electricity facilities. And the answer is very simple. As I understand and as I see, the Russians are no longer planning to start any offensive operation in this area, maybe in the next few months, or maybe even till February or March of the next year. They changed their state and they're planning to defend. And they're planning to reduce the Ukrainians while their own counter-offensive operation. The Russians, for now, are not planning to take more lands, to take new towns, and so on. There is only one area where the Russians maybe will continue their offensive operation, and where they will try to get more territories. And I'm talking about Bakhmut, Seversk, and New York, Avdiivka area. This one. Because this vital area, and the Russians do really need to push the Ukrainians from the front line, from Donetsk, from Gorlovka, and to have a safe buffer and to just reduce these trenches. But now let's try to split this territory into the front lines for better understanding of the situation. As we discussed, the first front line moves along the Oskol River, this one. And as we discussed, this is very safe positions for the Russians for many reasons, and the main reason is this Oskol River and upcoming winter and cold in autumn, fall, autumn, and late autumn and the winter. It will be very difficult for the Ukrainians to cross this area from the north. There is no way to do this because there is no infrastructure to move forces and to cross this river, and this position is very close to the Russian border. If we're talking about the south part, is because this Oskol River is very wide, and it will be also very difficult for the Ukrainians to cross this river. And of course, all the entrances around the bridges is at least should be under Russian control. Another front line is the area between the south part of Oskol and the, let's say, Lysychansk agglomeration, this one. This is the most important front line for the Ukrainians. They need to establish bridgehead in this area, but as I told you, the time is on the Russian side. As soon as they complete with regrouping, as soon as they complete with all these moving of their forces, every single day there will be more and more reinforcement in this area, and every single day they're in more and more safe position. And furthermore, the level of river grows every day and water becomes more and more cold in this area. So this is the reason that Ukrainians, maybe a few weeks more, 2 or 3 weeks, if the Russians are able to keep this area another 3 weeks, I suppose that Ukrainians won't be able to cross this area till the next March or April. This, we can say that this is the single front line, the north-west part of LPR, and as you understand, in the next few weeks, this area will be untakeable fortresses from the Russian side. Of course, if they're able to keep their position near Liman. The second front line, the first one, the second front line starts somewhere at Donetsk, and this front line ends also on the Severodonetsk, Lysychansk agglomeration, this one. The third front line is starting from Vasilievka and ends somewhere Dokuchaevsk or Uglidar. This is the third front line. The fourth front line starts in Vasilievka and ends Novokurakhova. It's like the Zaporozhye power plant bank coast, and this is like the separate front line. And the final front line is Kherson front line. This one. Now let's discuss about this area. As I told you, as we discussed, the north one soon is going to become like the place where the Ukrainians won't be able to cross the river, and they won't be able to do anything in this area. The second front line, this one between Seversk and Donetsk, is the area where the Russians, according to their special operation, still need to push, still need to attack, and still need to storm Bakhmut, Solidar, Seversk, Toretsk, New York, Avdiivka, all these towns, just with one purpose: to achieve the goals they created like in February, and to liberate the Donetsk People Republic and to return this territory under DPR control. This is the only area where they're planning to start offensive operation. Now we're going to the south, the area between Orekhov, Vasilievka, and Ugledar, this front line. This is the Ukrainian focal point. As we discussed, and as we have more and more evidence, the Ukrainians are planning to start counter-offensive in this area, using the same tactic as they use in Kharkiv district, using a lot of motorized mechanized brigade, a lot of infantry, and just to push and try to take more and more towns in this area as they did in Kharkiv region, with one purpose: to get into Energodar and to take control over the Zaporozhye power plant. This is a very important area because the winter is coming, and the Ukrainians, they need electricity, and they understand that they have 4 nuclear power plants. This is the only area where the Ukrainians can be on the safe side, because if they take control of this power plant, they understand that the Russians are not able to attack these plants because of many reasons, and one of them is nuclear pollution. So this is a very important area where the Russians understand need to focus and to prepare this area from the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation. Energodar power plant, yes, it's a very important front line, but the Russians don't need a lot of forces. They just need to keep somewhere like up to 1,000 soldiers in this area. I don't think they need more, just to be on the safe side on this bank of the river and not to allow the Ukrainians to do any crossing operation. And the final front line is Kherson front line. This is also very important front line because the Ukrainians still want to return control over this area. This is one reason. The second, this is the only bridgehead that the Russians have on this side of Dnieper River, and of course nobody knows what is going to be in a year or two. Maybe they will finish this war tomorrow, but if somehow the Ukrainians won't be able to develop their success, and if they will be defeated sooner or later, the Russians are able to use this bridgehead for their further offensive operation near Nikolaev and Odessa. So as you understand, there are 2 weak points in the Russian defense: Kherson front line and Gulay-Polye front line, this one. We're talking about Energodar front line. This front line will collapse only in case if, let's say, one of these front lines from left or right side is going to collapse. In any other case, the Russians are able to keep this area. If we're talking about Donetsk, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Gorlovka agglomeration, the Ukrainians are fighting in these areas since the 2014. So there are a lot of trenches. Let's take a look at the Russian sources map. You're gonna see all these red markers. So this area is well prepared. Of course, there are some differences. Let's say on the north of Gorlovka. Like on this area there are less fortifications, but if we're talking about this area, Chechensky Spetsnaz is there, Wagner group is there, brave soldiers. So this area very powerful and they know what they're doing, so I don't think that it will be a very easy job for the Ukrainians to crack this area. So we return to these front lines. Now let's discuss about reserves, because the upcoming phase of war is not the war of number. The war of number has ended, and this war has ended by the counter-offensive operation in Kharkiv. The next phase of this operation, I don't know how the Russians are planning to call this operation in the future. Maybe just speculation, just to calm down the Ukrainians, I don't know. But the next phase of this operation is going to be operation of logistic. and who has a better logistic, this side is going to win. And I'll explain to you my understanding of the Russians. Maybe they already decided to retreat, and maybe they have already left this entire Ukraine, and now everything I'm talking to you is like total bullshit. I don't know, because I'm trying to explain to you what kind of success the Russians want to achieve, and if you ask me what I would do in this situation, according to the information I have, and all of us have this information. So about the north, we understand about this area. That's impossible. There are a lot of towns. So there are just two areas, it's like Ariev area and Kherson district. Now we need to understand about situation with reserves. As we discussed, the Russians move all their forces from Kharkiv district, and with one purpose, to move their reserves in direction of Donetsk in summer here, just to be on the safe side and to be available with manipulation with their reserves. So if we're talking about Kherson district, there are a few points where the Russians are planning to keep the reserve. The first one is Kherson. It's like the local, let's say that's tactical reserve area. The second one is Melitopol. This is the second reserve area. The next one is Berdyansk reserve area and Mariupol reserve area. So this is the areas where the Russians are going to keep the reserve just to be on the safe side, and they are planning to keep them with one purpose. If the Ukrainians are planning to start attack from anywhere, these reserves will be used to stop the Ukrainians' offensive operation. And meanwhile, the Russians are planning to do the thing that they did before. They used to like attacking with the rockets, with artillery, trying to destroy as much as possible Ukrainian forces. And furthermore, if they're planning to change the status of this operation, they're also planning to attack some energy, water facilities on the entire Ukraine, just to force them to surrender. If we're talking about Donetsk, we understand that Donetsk itself is a very powerful place with the reserves, and there is also Lugansk People Republic capital, also very powerful reserves area. And so this is the tactical areas for tactical reserves. All these areas the Russians are planning to use. For example, if Ukrainians are planning to attack in direction of Vasilievka, the Russians will use Melitopol reserves. If the Ukrainians are planning to attack, let's say, Chernigivka, Pologi, the Russians are planning to use Berdyansk reserves. The same situation with Mariupol. They have the garrison there, they have a port, so they will use these reserves to stop, let's say, developing of Ukrainians near Volnovakha. Why are these towns? Because Volnovakha, Berdyansk has the railroad, has the ports, so that's why the Russians are able to supply this area using the sea. If we're talking Melitopol, there is a railroad's connection with Crimea and with Kherson. So this is the reason they can accumulate forces there, and they can also this town is connected with Berdyansk. So this is the tactical understanding of the Russian defense on the south. If we're talking about Donetsk, if you're talking about Lugansk, they are able to push their force to the north, but we understand that the Ukrainians are no longer able to, if they are not able to take control over Liman in the upcoming few weeks, that means that they won't be able to do something on the north, till the end of the special operation. This is tactical reserves. Now let's discuss the strategic reserve. Of course, there are two strategic reserves. So all these regrouping from Kharkiv just for one purpose, to optimize the logistic and to optimize this next phase of war, logistic war. And of course, the Russians are planning to have their strategic reserve somewhere in Rostov-na-Donu, this town. And using this town is very far from the front line, and for now the Ukrainians don't have possibilities to attack this area. And from these strategic reserves, the Russians are planning to, of course, support if it's necessary Lugansk, support if it's necessary Donetsk, and support if it's necessary Mariupol, and support if it's necessary Berdyansk. So they have ports, they have possibilities, they are able to, the distance between all these towns and the heart of strategic reserves is less than 130 kilometers. So it's not very difficult, everything at the same place, and you can try to work with your logistic. And about the north, there is no need to do anything with this if the Russians are able to establish a very powerful fortification line along the river Oskol. If the Ukrainians are able, I repeat one more time, break through near Liman, all this plan goes to nothing. It's like the waste of time what we are discussing right now. And if we're talking about the Melitopol and Kherson and let's say Energodar, this area is going to be supported from Crimea. So this is their strategic reserve base. So as you can see, the Russians are planning to build something like this. This is their like few level support area. So as you can see, Kharkiv is totally not in this picture. So this is the reason why the Russians decided to retreat. They understand now, at least in my opinion, and maybe I'm wrong, that they are planning to defend the territory they managed to take control over, like Kherson, Zaporozhye, Lugansk People Republic, and they will try to develop their offensive operation in the rest part of Donetsk People Republic, because today we saw a lot of video, let's say from Bakhmut, from this area. There are still heavy clashes. The Russians still have their this situation, this area develops in their favor, so they're still planning to complete their special operation. Now let's talk about this structure. So from my understanding, as I see, the only two places where the Ukrainians can attack the Russians is Kherson and Zaporozhye. Because to take Donetsk, as we discussed yesterday, yes, it's possible, yes, they can do this, but it can bring a lot of losses, and of course they can do this. It's also an option, but as you see, the Russians still have some strategic reserves to move forces and to stop the Ukrainians. It will be just a bloody battle, and nobody knows the result of this battle. What the Russians want to do. And again, this situation, this defense configuration is tightly connected with the thing that we saw yesterday in Kharkiv district, Kharkiv region, with the rocket attacks against the energy facilities. Let's say the Russians decided to attack from Kherson district or in direction of Kryvyi Rog. Or let's say like this. So anyway, in this case, the Ukrainians need to move their reserves in this direction. Then the Russians decided to go back. Later, the Russians decided to attack from Zaporozhye area in direction, let's say, Kurakhova, Pokrovsk, like all these towns, Gulay-Polye. In this case, the Ukrainians need to move the reserves in this area. So the same situation. They need just to solve the issue with logistic. How to do this, how to be on the safe side. The same situation from the Ukrainians. Let's say they attack in direction of Zaporozhye. For these purposes, the Russians move the reserves from Crimea if necessary, if they see that situation is very bad, and they're trying to stop the Ukrainians somewhere here. Then the Ukrainians decided to attack from Kherson district. In this case, the Russians moved their forces in direction of Kherson. So the same picture from the Ukrainian side and from the Russian side, but there is one important difference in this situation. And it's my understanding, at least if you ask me what I would do if I was on the Russian side. I would do it exactly like I'm saying, according to this situation. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe the Russians prepared a much more better plan than mine, or they are planning to something else, or maybe they're planning to declare the war. But anyway, so if we see this situation, we understand that those party who will be very flexible and mobile with reserve, sooner or later will achieve success. Who will be able to move reserve from one part to another, trying to avoid and stop the counter-offensive or offensive operation of your enemy, will be successful. And those party who will fail these logistic issues, this logistic like war, is going to lose the entire south. And my projection and my understanding that Ukrainians are going to lose this logistic war for one reason. And mainly this reason is because of this Dnieper River, this one. Because as we discussed in the beginning of this video, the Ukrainian benefits and their powerful side is a lot of railroads in this area, but most of them, these railroads, use electricity. You can't move, let's say, from Mykolaiv 300 tanks or 300 armored vehicles using like local roads to get some fuel and to give this fluid to the tracks and move forces from Mykolaiv, 300 armored vehicles in direction, let's say, of Pavlograd. It's impossible. The only one way you can do this is just by using train, railroad. And if we take a look at the Russians, you're gonna see that there is no rivers and there is no place where they can stuck in this area. They can transfer their army, their military forces from one side from Kherson till Mariupol on this side without any problems, because there is no bridges, there is no river, there is no place where they can stuck. And the most important, all their railroad connections, all these things is supported by the electricity from the Russian territory, from Mariupol, from Zaporozhye power plant, let's say, from Russian Federation. Believe me, they won't have any problems with transferring forces from one logistic area to another. But if we're talking about the Ukrainians, each time they need to move reserve from one side to another, they need to cross the bridges at Zaporozhye, the bridge near Dnipro or Dnipropetrovsk, Kamenskaya, or a little bit to the north near Kremenchuk. And as we discussed at the beginning of this video, the situation with this power plant, the Russians just need to destroy the Ukrainian energy facilities and they will lose this possibility. Or the Russians just need to destroy these bridges and the Ukrainians will lose their logistic capabilities. In this case, the Ukrainians need to do the following. Or they need to keep a lot of forces on each side of this front line, the same value like near Kherson, the same value near Donetsk, the same quantity, the same number. But I believe that at this stage of war, they don't have such reserves. Because as we saw, they started some offensive operation near Kharkiv, and for continue and developing offensive operation in the south, they need and they were forced to move their forces from Kharkiv in direction of the south, and the Russians attacked the energy facilities and entire logistic collapsed. This is the tactic that the Russians are planning to use, at least as I understand. They will try maybe to first they will try to defend themselves. If the Ukrainians will attack here from, let's say, in direction of Vuhledar, the Russians will try to do something here. Then the Ukrainians need to send reinforcement into this area. The Russians will collapse their energy system and they will stack on the river. Or the same situation, but from another side. The Russians will start their offensive operation near Kurakhova, near this area. The Ukrainians will try to move the reserve, their forces from NATO armored vehicles, everything they have from the west part of Ukraine in direction of the south, and they will be stuck on the river because of energy collapse or the bridge collapse or something like this. So this is the real reason from my understanding of the Russian regrouping. What are they planning? They want to exhaust the Ukrainians on the front line, to force them to run from one side to another, and every time with some problems, with some collapse, with some all these issues, and meanwhile they will lose forces. Because according to the timings, the Ukrainians should have started their offensive operation in the south yesterday. But they couldn't do this, or maybe even today they were planning, but they couldn't do this because of one reason. They couldn't transfer their forces from Kharkiv district. You know, the situation with the Kharkiv district is very funny. As I see, it's my opinion. Maybe you have a different opinion, different understanding, but I'm telling you what I see. The Ukrainians, before starting the counter-offensive operation in the north of near Kharkiv area, because they were afraid of being defeated, so that's why they moved all armored vehicles, all the reserves they had in this area. A lot of tanks, a lot of armored vehicles, a lot of trucks, a lot of artillery system, HIMARS system, M777 systems, and United Kingdom armored vehicles. So everything they have in this region. And they were successful. They managed to take control over this territory. And now they need to move their forces to the south. But the Russians destroyed the energy facilities. And all this equipment, all these forces now are trapped on the north, near Kharkiv. All these tanks, all these armored vehicles, all these HIMARS system, everything is trapped on the north, and the Ukrainians don't have any solution how to move these forces from Kharkiv area to the south. This is the real collapse. This is the situation the Russians understood, figure out how to win the Ukrainians, to collapse them. Now the Ukrainians, to move all these forces, they need ore to fix the issue with electricity. But I believe that as soon as they will restore the electricity, the Russians will start another rocket attack and they will shut down electricity one more time. And there will still no possibilities to move all these powerful fists from the north. Yes, they can use convoys for these purposes, like to fill the tanks with the fuel and to start trip along the Ukrainian roads. But in this case, we're going to see a lot of convoys, which will be a very nice target for the Russians. This is the first thing. And the second thing, you need a lot of fuel for this. And this fuel is also should be brought by the trains. But if trains cannot move, how can you bring fuel to fill your tanks that you want to use, let's say, in the south of Ukraine? This is the trap that Ukrainians appeared with this counter-offensive operation. Of course, some of you can think that it's speculation and it's like fantasy story, but this is the thing how I see this situation. I see that the Ukrainians can't, with all this army they use in Kharkiv, to leave Kharkiv. But the biggest problem with this, that now all these tanks, all these armored vehicles that they used in this area is located near railroad stations. Because their lack of fuel, they can't move. Of course, some of them can leave this area, but most of them are standstill. And you saw and you see how the Russians started shelling this town heavily. Because they see everything. They see the places where the soldiers live. They see the places where all these tanks are parked. They see everything. And they see that the Ukrainians don't have any possibilities to leave this trap with all these powerful armored fists, because they can't just transfer it to any other place because of shutdown of electricity in this area. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you that we condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Thank you. Bye bye.